like to tell you how a dress can change the world. It was around 2005 when I first started learning about human trafficking. I learned that slavery exists in every city of the world, around every major sporting event, in brickyards and brothels, at truck stops and massage parlors. I learned that it's estimated that over 40 million people are currently trapped in slavery. It's also estimated that 25% of those are children. As many as 70% are women. I do want to say up front that although this issue disproportionately affects women and girls, this is not a women's issue. Slavery takes many faces internationally, from the forced labor of the apparel industry to the sex tourism of underdeveloped nations. The global sex trade is the fastest growing criminal industry. It is massive, and it is thriving. And when I learned all this, it started a fire inside me, and I felt a sense of urgency that was personal. You see, when I was about 4 years old, I was molested. And for years, I carried this tremendous weight of shame and guilt. And I wrestled with these questions like, do I matter? Am I disposable? Can someone love me? It took years for me to heal and forgive and move forward. But to this day, when I hear about the reality of trafficking, of slavery in our world, that fire inside me grows. And learning about human trafficking was a vital part of my healing journey. In order to declare that the mass exploitation and abuse of women and girls is wrong and is evil, is not their responsibility or their shame to carry, I had to decide that the same was true for me and for my experience, that it wasn't my fault and it was not my responsibility to carry that shame anymore. Some of you know this, but when you shine a light on shame, it starts to lose its power. And so slowly, I brought my shame into the light. I told counselors, I told family, I told trusted friends. And an amazing thing happened. That shame began to completely lose its power over me. So, learning about human trafficking and feeling this fire and the sense of urgency to do something about it, I naturally looked at my own unique skill set for a way to engage in the fight. And that's where I hit a wall, because my unique talents and interests didn't seem to line up with making a difference. I'm not a social worker, a psychologist, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a police officer. I'm someone who's interested in fashion and trend analysis, writing, and wordplay. And frankly, my interests felt shallow in the grand scheme of things. And for a long time, I just thought, I guess there's nothing that I can do about this. And for years, I sat in this tension of feeling such passion and yet such powerlessness. But then in 2009, everything began to change, and it started with a dress. I was in college and as an English major, buried in books, and just stifled by the academic rigor and in need of a creative outlet. But I didn't have time for any of my normal outlets of crafting, sewing, baking. And so I thought, well, I have to get dressed every day, so why not use that as a way to bring some creativity into my days? And I decided to try a personal style challenge. I came up with the idea to try wearing a dress every day for a month. And the next full month happened to be December, and I love puns, and so I thought, okay, Dressember, that's too good. And then I did it. I wore a dress every day for a month and never planned on doing it again. But then the next year, my girlfriends brought it up and wanted to do it with me, and I thought, okay, they must also be bored. So I did it again with them. And then the next year, my girlfriend's girlfriends brought it up, and they wanted to join in. And so by that third year, when women I didn't even know were wanting to participate in my silly style challenge, I thought, maybe this isn't so silly. People like this. And I saw what the Movember campaign was doing, raising millions of dollars for prostate cancer research through men growing mustaches in the month of November. And I thought, if that can happen, maybe there's a chance that Dressember could raise some money for some anti-trafficking work. And so in 2013, I took what felt like a very bold step and aligned Dressember with International Justice Mission, which is a global organization that works to rescue and restore victims of slavery and other forms of violent oppression. I see they have some fans here tonight. And I remember thinking, we are going to go big. We're going to aim so high. We are going to try to raise $25,000, which felt like a huge, scary goal. And then we hit my huge, scary goal on day 3. And I realized something that started as a few girls in Southern California wearing dresses for fun had become a global community of 1,200 women in 32 countries who collectively raised over $165,000 in a month. Since then, the Dressember movement snowballed. The second year we raised $465,000, then we raised $925,000, then $1.5 million. Last year, 8,000 people registered across the world and raised over $2 million. So in 5 years, we have raised over $5 million towards the fight to end modern-day slavery. We've also added 11 more anti-trafficking organizations as grant partners, and we've built a global community of ordinary people with extraordinary passion, combined with a network of incredible organizations that are working to attack this issue from every angle around the world. In 2015, I noticed that a guy started using the Dressember hashtag on Instagram, posting photos of himself in a tie. And I thought, okay, that's really cool. I wish I had that idea. I didn't. It was his. But I reposted it. And then before I knew it, all these other guys started posting photos in ties. And so what we've seen is an increasing number of guys joining in Dressember. And last year, our top fundraiser was a guy, and his name was Ryan, and he raised over $15,000. Yeah, that was more than I raised. And so our global community of women fighting this injustice has expanded to include the very necessary voices of men, and for that I am so grateful. A couple years ago, I got to visit IJM's office in the Dominican Republic. In Santo Domingo, IJM focuses on cases of child sex trafficking. And I met a young woman named Miriam, whose story still stays with me. Miriam's mother wasn't able to take care of her because she was addicted to drugs. And so for most of her childhood, Miriam was passed between family members. And then when she was 14, Miriam's mother came back into her life and said that she wanted to take her in. And so Miriam was thrilled. She was hopeful she would finally have the life and relationship with her mother that she had craved for so long. Within a few weeks, Miriam's mother sold her to a trafficker for drug money. When IJM found Miriam, she was working the streets of Santo Domingo. She was 15 and 5 months pregnant. IJM partnered with police to lead an investigation and eventually rescue Miriam and represent her in court. And when I met Miriam, she was 17, and she radiated hope. Instead of appearing weighed down by the betrayal of her mother and the trauma of her exploitation, she seemed puzzlingly joyful. So much so that I had a really hard time with these two narratives. I thought, how could this be the same person? I was so overwhelmed by her story and by the magnitude of this issue. And yet, I began to see that because of the work of IJM, Miriam's story doesn't stop at her abuse. It doesn't center on her abuse. It is continuing, and it is bending towards redemption. I think it's human nature to look any huge injustice in the face and just feel totally inadequate, to think, there's nothing I can do about this. I don't have the money, the influence, the resources, the power. I felt that way for a long time. But I saw what I thought was a silly idea: create this community of like-minded people across the world who together are stirring global change. I saw my idea outgrow me to the point that I had to run to keep up with the size of it. Dressember has been a success in large part due to its collaborative nature. Through Dressember, I've seen what happens when we connect the dots between our interests and our passions, and we invite others to partner with us in the journey. Ideas are interesting. You probably have a lot of ideas, most of which you dismiss as impossible or silly. And truly, a lot of ideas are bad. I have a lot of bad ideas. But some ideas that seem silly turn out to be really good ideas. Today, I have 3 challenges for you. First, I want to challenge you to think about, what are you interested in and what are you passionate about? I don't know what's in this room, in this space. Maybe you have interests that don't seem to line up with your passions. Maybe you like cooking and you're passionate about immigration reform. You like singing and you're passionate about foster care. You like making jewelry and you're passionate about bringing the gospel to polytheistic communities. I don't know what God can do with those seemingly dissimilar interests, but I know that I like dresses and words, and I'm passionate about restoring dignity to women and girls. And for so long, I thought I had to choose between my unique interests and my passion for people. But you don't have to choose. God is so creative. And for me, it was a collision of this silly idea and a little bit of courage that sparked this global movement. Secondly, I want to challenge you to go a little deeper by considering your disappointments in a new way. For most of us, we have no trouble recalling our greatest disappointments in life, our trauma, our pain, our hurt. Unfortunately, in this life, there are many, many opportunities to be hurt. Illness, death, rejection, abandonment, divorce. Perhaps just as significantly, there are hundreds of tiny daily disappointments that threaten to ping us from every direction. And what we often do is weave together these false narratives about our big disappointments, our big pains, and then all the tiny disappointments. And we write these narratives for ourselves that just aren't true. Narratives like, I'm a failure. I'm not worthy of love. God is upset with me. Everyone will eventually leave. I shared my abuse story with you earlier to show how I believe that God has connected the dots. He's woven this thread between my shame and my trauma and used it to weave in me a heart that breaks for the girls that feel invisible in our world, the girls who are made to feel that they are only useful when they are performing, who are powerless against their exploiters. For years, I hid my shame when it was the key to my calling. The things you think are a liability in your life may actually be an asset. See, we like things to be clean and organized and linear, and it makes sense to us that when we get our act together, then we'll bear fruit. then we'll be useful to God. But the Bible says the opposite. It says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." That may not always feel true, but that is the truth. God's strength is perfect in your weakness, not your togetherness. It's your brokenness, your shame, your weakness, where God's glory can shine its brightest. If you let Him. That's the key. And sometimes you need to get outside of your bubble in order to see how your heart breaks. If you're someone who can't easily recall deep pain or trauma, praise God. But it's time to get out of your bubble, get out of your comfort zone. You may need to travel across the world or across your city. But start exposing yourself to the injustices, the inequities that millions of people face all around you, near and far. And then pay attention to how your heart breaks and ask God into that brokenness. You know, we sing, "Break my heart for what breaks yours." But God doesn't break our hearts just for brokenness. He breaks our hearts in order to call us. So pay attention to the brokenness and then ask, "Now what, God?" My final challenge is I want to invite you to consider the possibility that every decision you make, big and small, that there are actually hundreds of tiny choices you make every day, the things you buy, the things you wear, the things you say, that there are hundreds of tiny ways that you can advocate for the dignity of people all around you, again, near and far. Through Dressember, I have seen what happens when thousands of men and women make the tiny choice to wear a dress or a tie every day in December. Because of the woman wearing it, a dress can change the world. Thank you.